It was an informal school. For mathematics, we learned addition, multiplication, and long division. For English, we read passages from books, learned to spell words, and sometimes the teacher read stories out loud and we would write them in our notebooks. It was just a way of refreshing our memories, as the teacher put it. We didn't pay attention in class. We just wanted to be present so we wouldn't miss the trips to the city. We fought each other during the lesson, sometimes stabbed each other's hands with pencils. The teacher would continue on, and we would eventually stop fighting. We would then start talking about the ships we had seen from the banks of Crewe Bay, and the helicopter that flew by as we walked on Lightfoot Boston Street. And at the end of the class, the teacher would say, "It's not your fault that you cannot sit still in class. You'll be able to do so in time." We'd get angry and throw pencils at him as he left the hall. Afterward, we'd have lunch, then busy ourselves playing table tennis or soccer. But at night, some of us would wake from nightmares, sweating, screaming, and punching our own heads to drive out the images that continued to torment us even when we were no longer asleep. Other boys would wake up and start choking whoever was in the bed next to theirs. They would, though, go running into the night after they had been restrained. The staff members were always on guard to control these sporadic outbursts. Nevertheless, every morning, several of us were found hiding in the grasses by the soccer field. We didn't remember how we had gotten there. It took several months before I began to relearn how to sleep without the aid of medicine, but when I was finally able to fall asleep, I would start awake less than an hour later. I would dream that a faceless gunman had tied me up and began to slit my throat with the zigzag of his bayonet. I would feel the pain that the knife inflicted as the man sawed my neck. I'd wake up sweating and throwing punches in the air. I'd run outside to the middle of the soccer field and rock back and forth, my arms wrapped around my legs. I would try desperately to think about my childhood, but couldn't. The war memories had formed a barrier that I had to break in order to be able to think of any moment of my life before the war. The rainy season in Sierra Leone falls between May and October, with the heaviest rainfalls in July, August, and September. My squad had lost the base where I had trained, and during that gunfight, Mariba was killed. We left him sitting against the wall, blood coming out of his mouth, and we didn't think much about him after that. Mourning the dead wasn't part of the business of killing and trying to stay alive. After that, we wandered in the forest searching for a new base before the wet season started. But we couldn't find one early enough. Most of the villages we came upon were unsuitable, since we burned them or another group of fighters had destroyed them at some point. The lieutenant was very upset that we hadn't found a base, so he announced that we would keep walking until we found one. At first it began to rain on and off. Then it started to rain continuously. We walked into the thickest forest and tried to escape the downpour by standing under big trees, but it rained to the point where the leaves couldn't hold off the water anymore. We walked through damp forests for weeks. It was raining too hard one morning, and all of a sudden we were under fire. The RPGs we had failed to explode when they were fired. As a result, we retreated. The attackers didn't follow us far enough, so we regrouped again, and the lieutenant said that we had to counterattack immediately, so we could follow the attackers. They'll lead us to their base, he said, and we advanced towards them. We fought all day in the rain. The forest was wet, and the rain washed the blood off the leaves, as if cleansing the surface of the forest. But the dead bodies remained under the bushes, and the blood that poured out of the bodies stayed on top of the soaked soil, as if the soil had refused to absorb more blood for that day. At about nightfall, the attackers began to retreat. As they were running back, they left one of their wounded men behind. We came upon him, and the lieutenant asked him where their base was. He didn't answer, so someone dragged him with a rope around his neck as we chased the attackers. He didn't survive the drag. At night, the attackers stopped retreating. They'd come to the outskirts of their base and were fighting fiercely because they didn't want to give it up. Hit and run, callow tactics, the lieutenant ordered. We made two groups and launched the attack. The first group opened fire and pretended to retreat. The attackers chased after them, running past the ambush formed by the second group. We quietly got up and ran after the rebels, shooting them from behind. We repeated these tactics throughout the night and severely weakened the rebels. In the morning, we entered the village and killed the remaining fighters who didn't want to leave. We captured 8 of their men, tied their hands and legs, and left them in the rain. There were fireplaces in the village and lots of wood and food. The rebels had stocked up for the rainy season, but now we were the beneficiaries of the looted food and provisions. We changed into the dry clothes we could find and sat around the fire, warming ourselves and drying our shoes. I clutched my gun and smiled for a second, happy that we had found shelter. I extended my toes towards the warmth of the fire and then saw that they were pale and had begun to rot. We had been in the village for only a few minutes when the rebels attacked again. They didn't want to give up the village easily. We looked at each other sitting around the fire and angrily changed our magazines and went out to get rid of the attackers for good. We fought them throughout the night and the following day. None of us wanted to give up the village to the other, but in the end we killed most of the rebels and captured a few more. The others ran away into the cold and rainy forest. We were so angry with the prisoners that we didn't shoot them, but rather decided to punish them severely. It'll be a waste of bullets to shoot them, the lieutenant said. So we gave them shovels and demanded at gunpoint that they dig their own graves. We sat under the hut smoking marijuana and watched them dig in the rain. Each time they slowed down, we'd shoot around them, and they would resume digging faster. When they were done digging, we tied them and stabbed their legs with bayonets. Some of them screamed, and we laughed and kicked them to shut them up. Then we rolled each man into his hole and covered him in the wet mud. All of them were frightened, and they tried to get up and out of the hole as we pushed the dirt back on them. But when they saw the tips of our guns pointed into the hole, they lay back and watched us with their pale, sad eyes. They fought under the soil with all their might. I heard them groan underneath it as they fought for air. Gradually they gave up and we walked away. At least they are buried, said one of the soldiers, and we laughed. I smiled a bit again as we walked back to the fire to warm ourselves. By the fire, I realized that I had bruises on my arms, back, and foot. Alhaji helped to attend to them with some bandages and medical supplies that the rebels had left behind. It turned out that the bruises were from bullets that had merely torn my flesh as they missed killing me. I was too drugged and traumatized to realize the danger of what had just happened. I laughed as Alhaji pointed out the number of bruises on my body. In the morning, I would feel one of the staff members wrap a blanket around me, saying, "This isn't your fault, you know. It really isn't. You'll get through this." He would then pull me up and walk me back to the hall.